Former Disney cast members of Reddit, what are some of your craziest, creepiest, best stories? There weren't many of the creepy internet rumor type stories for me. I feel like a lot of those come from people who like the idea of a corrupted Disneyland. I will say though, some of the areas were really unsettling when they were empty and dark. Toontown was one. Especially since it always closes early. The twisted proportions are cartoony during the day. But when you're alone at night, it just feels really wrong. Like you might see a mascot running at you out of the dark. Not creepy in the traditional sense. Just personally scary. I worked night shift at DAC. And was working out on the safari at like 3 AM. As I was struggling to get something working near the Hippo River, I heard one of the hippos do their crazy loud noise out of the pitch blackness like 5 feet away from me. I then had the terrifying realization that if I fell in, I would most likely be killed within a minute and wouldn't be discovered until the morning when they would find my truck on the right path. I was much more careful in that area after that thought. Part creepy but mostly crazy story here. We had a rich guest come into Club 33, super secret yet not so secret restaurant in New Orleans Square, for the first time I believe, and he wanted a private room and some Disney princesses to have fun with, and wondered if any of the hostesses or waitresses were interested when we told him we could not accommodate him. I used to work at the box office. I once had a woman come up and ask for a ticket into Disneyland. She then placed a box on the counter while looking for her wallet. IDK how she managed to get that box past security. I see a picture on it and then I see dates. I realize that they are the ashes of assuming her little girl. I had to keep her at my window while I waited for security. It broke my heart, but a lot of people like to dump ashes on rides and it literally just gets vacuumed up at the end of the night. I was a CM from 2007 to 2014. It was said that there is a ghost of a little girl at Soarin' on B-side. They say she died in the parking lot before DCA was built. But no one can say exactly how. Some have claimed to hear footsteps coming up the metal stairs that lead below the screen during a flight. But the tower CM is the only one there, since the room is closed off during a flight and an open door would stop it immediately. So imagine sitting there, basically tuning out the show you've heard so many times, and start hearing metallic footsteps. It's dark. You feel like you're being watched. Very uneasy feeling. Of course I don't work there, but my aunt and uncle do. Uncle told us that among the bitter employees, Mickey is referred to as the rat. My favorite tidbit is that, because nothing bad is supposed to happen in Disney, there's weird euphemisms for a lot of things. If there needs to be a puke cleanup at one of the rides, it's called an as a protein spill. Former employee, but not of the parks themselves. We were given a tour backstage at Disneyland and I have an image burned into my mind that has never escaped me. It was of a clothing rack. One on wheels. Placed back behind the Tower of Terror. On it, placed on hooks, were about 10 Mickey Mouse heads that must have been either drying after a wash or moving to a new location. The blood orange sunset, combined with the tower and what appeared to be decapitated Mickey heads hanging from hooks, is a fond creepy memory. My aunt from the Philippines used to own a little hot dog cart that was a few hundred yards away from the entrance to the Orlando Disney in Florida. Every time I visited her she would get me into the park. And this being the 70s, I didn't need a parent to go with me. The craziest thing I ever saw was on this little Mark Twain trail in Frontierland. I was walking by myself and stuffing glob after glob of cotton candy into my yap hole when all of a sudden I get the urge to go number 2. Now I was only 11 but had an idea of just how bad it would be to dump in my pants, so I dropped off, squeezed my little rump cheeks through the fence surrounding a donkey on the trail and splurted out a creepy amount of liquid hell scallions. I had nothing to wipe with except the cotton candy bag. Meanwhile I hear a commotion up ahead and it's 2 workers dressed in safari gear walking towards me. I pull my pants up and casually lean against the fence like I'm just watching this donkey do nothing. Next thing I know the workers have gloves on and are examining my poop, talking about how the donkey has a terrible illness again. What a life. I worked at a restaurant in downtown Disney in California as a host. James Spader came in once. Tried to get a table with his dog, who was obviously not a service dog, and even if it was an emotional support dog, they don't have to be legally allowed inside a restaurant. I told him I would be happy to seat him if he left his dog at the kennel, right across the esplanade. But I could not seat his dog inside. What if a health inspector came in? He yelled at me so much. His face turned red. He told my manager to fire me. Luckily, the restaurant had a patio, and the manager sat Spader at a table on the patio closest to the exit so we wouldn't get in trouble. My manager actually stood up for me. Told Spader I was right. Spader still tried to get me fired. This was 10 years ago. I still hate James Spader with a red hot passion. Such an entitled ass. And since he always plays assholes, I know he's not even a good actor. However, Christian Slater was very polite when he came in. There might not be a lot of responses to this. Disney is kind of a stickler when it comes to having its employees sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Even the general staff and costumed characters at the parks have to sign them. Disney's always been real big on that magician mentality where if you know the inner workings the magic is dispelled. That just happens to go hand in hand with protecting the business image bottom line. Bonus anecdote. I got to go to Pasadena my freshman year in high school to march in the Rose Parade, and we also marched in the closing parade at Disneyland one of the nights we were there, so in the same week I took the backlot tour at Universal and got to go behind the scenes at Disneyland. It was an eye-opening and worldview shrinking experience and a lot of fun for a bunch of high school kids. Not so much behind the scenes stuff, but one of my favorite stories. I worked at Epcot for 8 years. And this happened sometime in the early 90s. There was a couple from somewhere in the Midwest that had driven to Miami to adopt a disabled child, their 9th. On the way home they decided to stop at Disney World for the kids. After pulling into the Epcot parking lot, their handy van caught fire. They got all the kids out, but the van was a total loss. Disney put them all up in one of their hotels while the couple tried to figure out what to do next. Turns out, there was a convention of Rotary International at the Swan Hotel. One of the members saw the story on the news and at breakfast the next morning passed the hat among the members. They ended up collecting enough to buy the couple a brand new van, extra equipment for all the kids, and a hefty check left over. I have always held a certain amount of pride in the Rotary Club for this amazing generosity. Former photographer at Disney World and worked very closely with the characters. There were some creepy regulars. There were this couple who'd pretty much come in every day and would get super mushy with the cast members. Like a first name basis kind of thing, and they would make sure to catch specific performers during their set. No one knows how they know this info. We think they just stalk them. Some CMs think it's harmless, but I think it's incredibly odd. They even expect some special treatment because they are regulars. I've only encountered them a couple of times, but they managed to find me on Facebook just based off my name tag info. Not that great a story, but I pet a Disneyland cat. This is a great story. Well done. Friends with a Disney employee. The workers are paid below living wage, but many are so obsessed with Disney culture they would rather be poor than work elsewhere. Especially the young ones. Many spend their off days at the park too. Disney takes advantage of this loyalty for sure. It is a very cult-like place for employees, with many of them having getting out and life after Disney stories. Don't want to out who I am, but I used to work as a host at a restaurant on Main Street at DL. I have so many stories. One woman came up and asked where the bathrooms were, so I told her. She then decided that the line was too long, so she tried to just pull down her pants and pee in the lobby. Security came very quickly. A lot of people try and spread their loved ones' ashes at DL. It's very popular in the rivers of America. I've never seen it, but apparently security stops someone once a week. I had a woman who was so unbelievably angry at MNY Hotel. I honestly don't remember why. that she was literally screaming at my supervisor that it would just take one military itch like her to bring Disney World to its knees. This was almost 10 years ago, so I forget most of the story now. But I recall she had a giant trash bag of merch. And I think she was angry about a long distance bill charge too. It was genuinely so insane. I worked at one of the restaurants in NK. I had a family abandon their adult son, who was in a wheelchair with a slew of health complications, in the middle of our walkway while they went on rides. He was there for about 2-3 hours. Man. This one just makes me mad. Half because I know Disney makes accommodations for disabled people to go on rides, and half because he's stuck with a family of assholes who abandoned him to go big dig around on rides. I knew a woman who played a female character from an animated film. She, and presumably many other such actresses, have to fend off countless come-ons from adult males, often with their kids and even wives nearby, without breaking character. There are security guards watching such actresses. Discreetly, but they are not far. And they will have a chat with the most persistent. I used to work in the stores in DCA. We had closed for the night and I had just fixed the lollipop tree. I walk across the room to straighten the embroidery counter when I hear this clunk behind. Turning around, I see one of the lollipops on the top had jumped and landed a foot to the left of the tree. No one was around and it happened within seconds of me being at the counter. A lot of crazy and funny things have happened to me while working there. However, that was the only crazy thing. I miss being there. The 2 tips I can give to you if you're visiting the parks. 1. Be kind to the cast members. 2. Be extra careful with the costumed characters. We do get hurt a lot by guests. This isn't a creepy story, but a horrifying one. I was working the day of the Columbia accident. I tried to find my telling of this story in my post history, but I'm on mobile and it's taking me too long. In 1998 on Christmas Eve, a cleat ripped off of the ship as it was docking. The clear sling shouted through the crowd, nearly decapitating a guest in front of his kids. It was terrifying not knowing what was happening or who was affected. I can only imagine how the CMs felt when the America Sings accident happened. I know I'm not being very helpful with links because of mobile, but the info is public, so I hope someone can link the references I'm making. At the Haunted Mansion ride in Disney World's Magic Kingdom, people would try to throw their loved ones' ashes into the graveyard. I'm not kidding, we had to close down the ducking ride to clean and sanitize. At Disney right now, Jungle Cruise ride malfunctioned and elephants started spraying everyone like it was a fire hose. That was pretty funny. We have an entire underground catacomb system in Magic Kingdom in Florida. Sometimes you could hear footsteps behind you when it was empty. I worked at Margaritaville on City Walk. Universal is close enough. We have 2 kitchens there, with a little walkthrough in between. A drum guy got lost looking for the bathroom and found his way to this little path. We found him passed out cheating in a bucket right there in between the 2 kitchens. I grew up in the Orlando area, and I was a lifeguard at Typhoon Lagoon during summers when I was in college at U of Florida. One night during closing duties, I was picking, which is to say I was walking around with a trash bag picking up whatever trash I found. And what did I find in the middle of the queue line for one of the rides? A giant pile of human poo. Somebody had taken a massive dump in the middle of the line shortly before closing. I won the rock paper scissors with my buddy, so he had to clean it up. A buddy of mine worked at what he calls Auschwitz, Disneyland Anaheim, back in the early 90s. The story he loves relating to me is how he knew a Disney princess on a float was receiving oral sex from her boyfriend hiding under the hoops of her dress. Legend has it some dude managed to see 2 of the Disney princess performer actresses making out. Lucky sod. I worked at the stunt show in Hollywood Studios last year, and we always had to stay open past 2 AM some nights for private events. Most of these were for cheerleading groups who would rent out the park, and our theater became a dance party, which was annoying but really not too bad. The worst part was about every 30 minutes we'd have to walk through our theater's queue because teenagers would sneak into the trees and just go at it. One night a fellow cast member and I caught 6 different couples within the span of 2 hours. And had to report them to their captains, which was always the most uncomfortable situations. Does Goofy ever walk Pluto? And if so, isn't that messed up? I used to work in the stores and there was this one guy who came in and sat with a little girl who was left alone in the theater by her nanny and started asking her weird questions like who she's with and how old she is. It wasn't until my fellow cast member, also a guy, noticed and approached them that the guy stood up and left immediately. We also had another incident where a guest complained to one of my stage leads that there was a man going around and asking children how old they were. Turns out he didn't know the size of his own kid's feet and he was trying to find another kid who is the same age to figure it out. My stage lead pretty much yelled at the guy lol. Worked there as a valet during college. Best story was driving a Bentley and a few weeks later a 67 Porsche convertible. The drive was less than a quarter mile but they were the best drives I've ever taken. I came into this thread expecting fun stories. Came out thinking Disney is basically a dystopia like a smiley version of 1984. Creepy would have to be going backstage one time and then seeing a room filled with Mickey Mouse heads. It was truly the stuff of nightmares. Also the housing we lived in was very Stepford Wives-y, which freaked me out a bit. But honestly no real horror stories. Best would be seeing how magical the whole experience was for the Make-A-Wish kids. It was sad, but worthwhile. When I worked at Wilderness Lodge we had a guest that was visiting the Fort Wilderness campgrounds. He striped down to his red boxer shorts outside one of the restaurant windows and then proceeded to run through the campground from security. Somehow he found a backpack leaf blower and put it on and continued to escape security. They finally found him passed out in a utility shed all curled up to that leaf blower wearing nothing but his boxers and covered in scratches from the woods.